Amanda, is everything ready on your end?
Yes, we are ready to go.
Great. Can you make me a co-host too, please?
Okay, you should be ready to go now.
Great. Thank you. All right, good afternoon. I am going to call the Land Use and Planning Committee to order. We continue to meet virtually, as you all know. If you are viewing this meeting outside of the Zoom meeting, whether that's on YouTube or on the city's agenda platform, you can join the live meeting by visiting ci.missoula.mt.us/webcasts. And then on the agenda, there's a link to join the meeting. There's also instructions to join by phone. And if you are joining us by phone, you can press *9 to be recognized for public comment. If you're joining us in the Zoom meeting, you can use the hand raise feature. You're also always welcome to provide comment via voicemail or email at 406-552-6012 or by email at council@ci.missoula.mt.us. So we have two regular agenda items. I guess before that, we'll go through our administrative business. Our first item is roll call. And Amanda, would you mind calling the roll, please?
Sure.
Thanks.
Anderson?
She's absent today.
Absent. Becerra?
Present.
Contos? Absent. Harp? Absent. Hess?
Present.
Jones? Absent. Merritt?
Present.
Ramos? Absent. Cheryl?
Present.
Vasika? Absent. Von Lossberg? Absent. And West?
Present.
Okay, thanks. So we're short of a quorum, so we'll hold we'll hold approval of the minutes, and we'll hopefully circle back around to that. That's a few more absences than I was expecting. I know a few people are out today, but I haven't heard from others, so hopefully the others will filter in. Is there any public comment on items not listed on our agenda? Seeing none, we can move right into our regular agenda items, and we'll take these in the order listed. So our first item is a rezone of a variety of properties in the 2100 block of River Road. This is a follow-up to the public hearing that began on Monday. And just to clarify, this is our new process that we're piloting, where we have the public hearing at the very beginning of the process, followed by what used to be the pre-public hearing presentation after the public hearing. So we'll continue to refine that process and take feedback on what everyone thinks of that, but that's why we're seeing this today. For the record, Gwen Jones has joined us. And I think it'd be best probably to turn it over to Dave de Grand Prix for any updates on the staff report. Or Dave, I'm not sure if you intended to give a presentation today or just be available for questions and discussion, but I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thanks. Jordan can be available for the presentation, give it again, or can be available for questions. Councilperson Merritt did have a question the other night that I wanted to address, and that was in regard to, there are several lots. So the zoning in the area of the subject property, 2103 River Road, the zoning in the area is RT10, which typically requires a 10,000 square foot minimum lot size. The area is a mix and match of lot sizes. There are some lot sizes in the area that are still actually over 4 acres, and some as small as about 2,000 square feet. And so I think the question was, how did this occur? How was the zoning, the RT10 zoning applied, and that sort of thing. I think a little bit of context or history was what Councilperson Merritt was looking for. And I've done a bit of research, don't have it all 100% nailed down, but from what I've found, the area was in the county, of course, originally. And from what I'm told, there was a push back in the early 90s due to water quality concerns with septic systems and things like that, there was a push to annex the area. So some of the properties were developed on a more urban scale following that annexation, or maybe in conjunction with that annexation as sewer was extended. There were also several planning efforts. There was a Reserve Street plan that recommended a dwelling unit density of 4 per acre. So that would be about 10,000 square foot lots. But there were also incentives or bonuses for increasing the density over time if certain conditions were met. There was this thing called the Planned Neighborhood Cluster that encouraged traditional neighborhood development and things like that. And then since 2015, you now have a growth policy recommendation that's more dense than 4 per acre. Well, I guess it includes it, but it's 3 to 11 dwelling units per acre in this area. So I guess to make a long story short, this area has evolved over time. Originally, there was a low density, septic system type level of development. Over time, the city's emphasis has been on increasing density, focusing inward, connectivity, preventing sprawl, and providing incentive for more dense development. So that's kind of, I think, that's the story of how we've gotten to this situation today.
Okay. Thanks, Dave. Julie, you have a question?
Yeah, thanks. I just want to thank Dave for that explanation. And one of the things that struck me as I looked at this was that the requested density just really doesn't seem like it's that much different from what's on the ground. Dave, does that make sense with what you've seen?
Yes.
And then I do have one kind of unrelated concern. The comment that you made on Monday night that this lot is still on septic and its own private well for drinking water was a little bit of a surprise to me. And I understand that it sounds like that it's understood that they would be required to hook up to sewer. Is that correct with the rezone, or would that just come at the time that they did pulled a building permit?
So in talking with folks in our engineering office, the rezone would not trigger a requirement to connect to city services. However, a building permit application would. So if substantial changes are going to be made to any structures, the way I understand it, that would trigger improvements, connections to city services.
So one more question, if I may, Jordan.
Go ahead, Julie.
Then the water then is a maybe a separate issue, and it sounded from what you said on Monday night like that the water in the sewer might be treated differently. But I would point out that the water right that's currently associated with that property only allows for water for 2 buildings. So, I guess a question of whether or not they can comply if they were to try and stay on that private well, if they could comply with state regulations. And all that to say, I guess I would strongly encourage that they hook up to both city water and sewer and if there's other buildings built on this property.
Thanks, Julie. So Dave, I don't have a preference for, I don't need to see the presentation. It's fresh for me still from Monday. Does anyone else want from the committee want to see anything in particular from the presentation, or we can run through it all, or we can do we can review portions of it. I guess just raise your hand if you do. And then we also have the applicant in attendance, and I'm going to admit him into the meeting as a panelist. Okay, so Mr. Eater's here, and you should be able to. There we go.
Hey.
Hi there.
Hello. Hi. Yeah, thank you all. I just wanted to address the last question Julie had. Yes, they're all on septics. If anything were to happen to them, have to hook up the city sewer. As Dave said, you know, any new building, which the buyers do want to do, that would trigger review process and hooking up to the city sewer. They have also indicated they would at the same time want to upgrade the water system, city sewer, all that out, all at the same time. So just so you all know, that would be done in conjunction. Basically, if you're digging a ditch, it's easier to lay them both there next to each other. So just wanted to let you all know that.
Great, thanks for the update on that. Does anyone have any other questions or discussion items? Okay, seeing none, I think we are good here. We don't have, this is, Dave, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that we're treating this like this is between final consideration and public hearing. So, or between the public hearing and the final consideration. So we have no need to make a motion. This just automatically returns to the council floor. Is that your understanding?
That's correct. On Monday night, the 24th, will be final consideration, and there's a motion associated with that to approve the zone change. But today, notice this is simply a discussion item.
Okay, and this is not next Monday. This is on the 24th that it's back.
Wait a minute, I could be wrong about that. I have several projects in my head. Sorry.
Yeah.
No, it's the 17th.
Okay, great. So this will be back on the 17th. Julie, you have another question or comment?
Yeah, I'm still just trying to wrap my head around this new process, I guess. So normally we would have made a motion in committee about
So
that.
normally we would have a pre-public hearing, which would have come to us as an informational item, and that would have been before the public hearing, and then we would have the presentation and the public hearing again. So part of the idea was that I think the idea was twofold. One was to streamline the process so that we're not hearing the same presentation multiple times. The other was to front load the public hearing so that we could have our formal vehicle for gathering public feedback earlier in the process. And then when we do our more substantive committee work, we could really have a sense of any kind of public comment that came up in the public hearing. I think those are the two primary reasons for moving in this direction. I will say it's an adjustment, and we're kind of piloting it. So if there's any feedback on process, let's give it a few projects to work the bugs out, and then maybe we'll have a discussion around the process and how people like it.
Yeah, because the agenda makes it look like it's something that we're gonna put a motion out there for, but I guess technically that motion has already been made. And is that true for the next item that's on our agenda as well? Yes,
it's the same situation for both items. And it would probably be a good idea to, in the future on the agendas, clarify those around. I'll work on a better way of wording that. Mary, do you have any comments on this process? I think you might have a better understanding of it than I do.
Yes, I would say that there, essentially council would be hearing both some public comment and the presentation from staff and the applicant at the public hearing first. And then if there were any additional questions for staff and the applicant at LUP, you could ask them and be ready at final consideration to make the motions. So we should probably change the LUP agenda to not include the motions, or it could include the staff recommended motion, but no motion has been made yet, and it won't be made until final consideration.
Yeah, and I think sometimes on the staff reports, we have, if there are different motions at different meetings that are required, sometimes we list those out. So maybe we can just clarify that on the agenda. Julie, does that answer your question?
It does. And then I have actually one more item that I want to mention specific to the rezone, if I could. Sorry.
Yeah, I think maybe Mirta has something on this topic. So let's go to her first and then we'll come back. Mirta?
Thank you. Oh, I almost forgot. So if someone who cannot attend the Monday night meeting and is counting on learning more about a project on a Wednesday committee meeting, they won't get a presentation. They'll have to come prepared with questions. Is that right? I'm just wondering, for those who sometimes cannot make the Monday night meeting and they use the council committee meetings to learn and ask questions, the process still allow for that?
Well, I mean, that's true. I guess that meeting is on YouTube and eScribe and is in a variety of places. And I would hope that they would, as always, read the staff report and review the materials. And it's just not, there wouldn't be 2 live presentations. But that information remains available, and I would hope that committee members would avail themselves to it.
I was mostly thinking of the public or perhaps the development community. I know that it's our jobs to come prepared, and I would hope that we are, but I'm just wondering for the general public or anyone in the community who, and I guess I'm just thinking of if we were doing this in person, how would that work? I mean, I know that in the past, some people come to the committee meetings to learn more about a project. And
Yeah.
it seems like with this process that might not be an opportunity.
Okay, that's great feedback, and I will I would like to schedule an agenda item to talk about this process. Like I mentioned, this is sort of an idea that the clerk's office and CPDI staff were interested in trying, and so I'll put this on the agenda sometime in the future to have a more in-depth discussion around. Dave, do you have something on this topic?
Yeah, just quickly, as staff people, I think we'd always be willing to give the presentation again, provide information to council and the public, of course. So we'd certainly be willing to do that. Just also don't want to waste your time.
Yeah, thanks for shedding more light onto that. Julie?
Okay, so one thing I just wanted to ask about the rezone in particular, some of the concerns that I've heard from neighbors of this property is about the potential for new buildings on this property to be very tall. And Dave, is it correct that the building height between the current zoning and the new zoning is exactly the same?
That is correct. It's a maximum of 35 feet, typically 30, but with certain roof pitch, it can go up to 35. But that's exactly the same height as the zoning currently allows.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, great. Well, this is a good discussion on this item. Is there any public comment on the item? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on. And I want to say I appreciate all the comments on the process, and I just want to I want to try this process, and we'll have a discussion around process and make sure that we're happy with this. But we'll do a few pilot projects first and go from there. Our second item is the group living conditional use for the Hogan Senior Living at 228, 234, and 246 South 6th Street West. And Caitlin, I'll turn it over to you. And maybe this time let's maybe do a brief recap just to refresh everyone's memory.
So brief recap. This is the location of the subject property. It's these 3 parcels in the corner of Hazel and South 6th Street West. It's a conditional use, so it is zoned RT 2.7, and the applicant is proposing a group living conditional use. So that is why we're here today, for council to analyze the review criteria and vote on that. Or we're not voting today, we're voting next on Monday. It abides by the growth policy. These are the current conditions of the parcel. This is the renderings of it. And so it's 36 bedroom suites with shared kitchen, dining, living spaces. It abides by all zoning setbacks, density, parking. Parking was the big topic of a lot of the public comment that came in, the written public comment. And so definitely get into this more as you all ask questions. Required parking for a group living building is 2 spots per building. And as you can see on the site plan, the applicant is providing 6 plus this van ADA access. And yeah, is there any others? I can go into the conditions as well, or do we want to go on to proposed conditions as well, or should we go on to just questions?
Let's have this be question driven for now. I'm sure we'll get into all of that just for consistency. So the applicants are here. They're in the meeting as well. We have the opportunity for public comment as well. Julie, do you want to start us off with questions?
Okay, I'm just going to wade right into the parking issue. And I understand what Caitlin said about what's required. And that I am usually loath to say, oh, we should have more parking, because I'm way more interested in having space for people to live than for spaces for cars to exist, or leaving spaces open for cars to potentially exist that are not used very often. But knowing this particular location the way that I do, of having had kids at the preschool there for 2 years, parking is a premium. And with the events that often happen at that church, every single available parking space within a couple of blocks gets taken up routinely. And so I wonder, I guess I'll try and form this into a question. I understand what Caitlin said, that the requirements say that a group living only requires 2 parking spaces, but does our definition of group living contemplate 36 individual units within a single building?
Caitlin?
The intent of the group living definition is to treat it like a single dwelling unit with a lot of bedrooms. So in the similar way that a single family dwelling, no matter how many family members you have, it requires 2 parking spaces, it being Title 20 zoning. It's carried over like that, compared to, so this is viewed as a single dwelling unit with 36 bedroom suites, so a lot of bedrooms. So it's a similar parking requirement, as opposed to multi-dwelling, which is independent entrances, independent cooking, and everything's independent and separate, and that's when the parking requirements are bumped up, and that's where the big difference in Title 20 is.
Julie, you have a follow-up?
I think it's going to be problematic. I'm happy to see this type of development. I really just wish that it was coming with a few more parking spaces, and I will leave it at that.
Gwen?
Thanks. I have a handful of questions, but I'm going to start with parking. And I've been thinking about this a lot too, and walked the area and looked at the area from an aerial map, and I kind of want to dive into the details a little bit. And it's interesting, the preschool and school issue, at the Congregational Church in the U District, there's very limited parking also, and kind of the same dynamic. So I was keeping that in mind as I was looking at this. But first of all, I don't think we can have this type of living scenario on every street corner in a residential neighborhood, but I think there is capacity to absorb some. And then when I looked at this area, I think there's some factors that we should look at. So Caitlin, my first question is, first of all, on the perimeter of this building footprint, there is public parking on the street, and I counted about 10 spots. But then directly north of this, adjacent to the school, there's diagonal parking that was created in the boulevard, so it's actually much denser parking. And that's all public parking also? Clearly it was modified at some point. There probably was a boulevard, and then they created denser parking. Oh, lovely, thank you. She's pulling her map up. There we go. Thanks.
You're talking about like this?
Now that's in the alley. I'm talking about out on the street on Hazel. If you understand what I'm.
Like along here?
So that's the footprint of the project directly north.
Here.
That's correct. That is diagonal parking. Clearly the boulevard was taken out. It's denser parking. I just want to question, is that is public parking, or is that private parking somehow for the school? It's right of way, so I imagine it's public. Or maybe that's something you need to look into and ask further questions on, but I'm assuming.
I can probably answer that question.
Thanks.
Anything in the right of way would be considered public parking. And, depending on when it was created, it might not be currently legal parking just because the depth, someone parking there may be backed into a drive lane. So sometimes as things are getting developed, we eliminate some of that angled parking if there just isn't room for it to function safely. But sometimes we're able to retain it, and so I'm just not sure in this location.
So what I'm talking about is adjacent to the school, not the project, and that you don't know if that's public parking or not?
It is public parking. It's just whether it has the correct depth as angled parking to meet current standards for parking, because it shouldn't, there's a length of a vehicle that shouldn't extend into the drive lane for the street itself. But yes, existing today, it is public parking. Any parking in the right of way is public parking.
Great, thanks. And Jordan, can I just continue on with a few questions? Is that okay?
Yeah, go right ahead, Gwen.
So there's a bunch of parking north on Hazel, and then directly across Hazel from this project, there's also a scenario where the boulevard was eliminated and it's quite dense parking. And then if you go to the other side of the block over on Myrtle, adjacent to the parking lot, that is also public parking, and it's diagonal parking, so it's much denser, as well as the parking lot itself. So I just, first of all, wanted to confirm, I know we're asking questions today, but all of the on-street parking is public parking and anyone can use it, correct? Caitlin and Mary?
Yep, that's correct.
Okay, thanks for that. It just kind of helps to look at this a little bit more holistically. Jordan, I had other questions. Do you want me to just keep going?
Yeah, and I want to highlight too that the developer and architect are both here. So if we have questions, they're in the meeting. So
Okay.
Gwen, go ahead.
Yeah,
Gwen.
do the applicant, developer, or architect want to address the questions that have been asked so far?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay.
If anyone would like to.
Yeah, thank you. Colin Lane with MMW Architects. I think there's a few things about parking that I'd like to say. As is being pointed out, there is on-street parking in this area. there's a few other balls in the air. I think the church is planning on redeveloping their parking lot, the 3 lots that are to the immediate east of this project. The church is planning on expanding their parking lot. Now that's their parking lot, but it potentially could alleviate some of the need for the church to use on-street parking as well. There are also a couple of things that the applicant that we are proposing, or I should say looking into, we're looking into possible leasing parking spaces from the church that has not been finalized. And that may be successful, that may not be successful, but that's something that's happening. My client Mike is also looking into a rideshare program. And so again, that's not finalized, but I think we do take the issue of parking seriously. We know it is a concern. People do have cars. Seniors in particular may need to rely on cars more than bikes, for example. But we also feel really good about the neighborhood, really good about the neighborhood. The tons of amenities are within walking distance. There's great bus access, both towards Higgins and towards Orange Street and on 6th. And we feel like this is a really wonderful location for this kind of project. It doesn't require people to have cars, and I think as people look for places to live, that's an obvious characteristic of this project in this neighborhood, is that you will not necessarily have to bring your car with you. Thank you.
Thanks. Gwen, I know you have more questions. I'm gonna go to Heidi, who hasn't asked a question yet, and then I'll come right back to you, if that works.
That's great. Thanks.
Heidi?
Sorry to cut you off, Gwen. So I have 2 main questions. And I know that this is a net gain in units, essentially, if this gets approved. But I was wondering if someone could speak to whether these existing residences are currently occupied, and if the folks that live there have managed to find homes elsewhere. So that's my first question. And then my second question is about, I guess, the tear down process, whether any of this is going to be deconstructed rather than just demolished.
Yeah, I could take that one. Hi, Heidi. So the units were vacated prior to us purchasing the land back in November. The church had owned and maintained them as rentals for years. That's not quite true. They owned them. They did not maintain them because they had always intended for some other use in that property. So they were very run down. I think the church felt bad about that. And that was actually a requirement that they made for our purchase, was that we would take the houses down upon doing that. Actually, 3 of the houses are gone. There's the small little yellow house in the corner that remains. Taken down, were deconstructed with Wasteless Works. They did a good job, and we were able to preserve some of that wood that's going to be incorporated into the new building, we hope. It won't be structural pieces, but some accent walls and so forth. So did that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks. Those are great answers.
Thanks. Gwen, back to you.
Great, thank you. The other area that I kind of wanted to ask a question on is the conditional use status of this group home. And I feel like as I read through all of the public comments and I've gotten emails, there's just it's a new concept to some people, so they're trying to understand how it works. And so, Caitlin, if you could talk about this a little bit. We have a building that's being built that is not a conventional building, and that it's not every single unit is a standalone. Instead, it's more like a dormitory or a fraternity house, basically. And so there's this conditional use process, but if this is approved and it goes forward, and then 10 or 20 years later, it changes hands and they don't want to do 55 plus, how would that unfold? What options are out there? Do you understand my question?
Yeah. So the age restriction is separate from the conditional use. The age restriction is not something that zoning is regulating. That's just what the applicants are intending to do. And the details just to paint the picture for this application. So if this gets approved as a group living use, conditional use, and then it needs to change, it changes hands down the line, it can change to any outright approved use in the RT 2.7 zone, assuming that it keeps the same zoning. And then if it is to switch to a different conditional use, so let's say in my presentation, I was rounding out community residential facility, healthcare facility. If they were to choose it with that, it has to go through its own new conditional use process. So if it were to change from a group living to something else, that is also a conditional use, a new conditional use process needs to happen. If it's going to change from group living to a permitted use, it can do that. But it will have to meet all of the Title 20 and relevant standards. So if this were to pass as is with the 6 parking spots, it would be very difficult for it to change to a multi-dwelling facility because it would need to meet multi-dwelling setbacks, parking, and all those types of standards. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Follow up, Jordan?
Yeah, go ahead, Gwen.
So this, thank you for that, Caitlin. And just to clarify, this is a group living situation in which it's basically kind of like a dormitory on each floor with a group kitchen and some group living space. Mm-hmm. The 55 and older category is a marketing label used by the owner. That is the group that they are shooting for and want to create that kind of environment within this building. In the future, if they wish to veer from the 55 and older, that's within their purview, and it would be not 55 and older, it could just be people living there of different ages. Is that right? Like, what is the future of this in the neighborhood? That's what I'm trying to figure out. And I understand to come back for a rezone and to change it, but just within the umbrella of what
of this group living.
Yes.
Yeah, so the 55 and up restriction, from as far as I know, is a federal program. And so I'm going to pass this to the applicant to talk about the Housing of Older Persons Act that they intend to apply for. Colin, can you speak to that a bit more?
And can I just add one thing? Multi-dwelling wouldn't be permitted in the RT 2.7, so it couldn't be converted to a multi-dwelling building. It would have to likely, because of all the bedroom suites, be retained as some type of group living. It could be a community residential facility, but it'd have to meet all the federal and state law standards for one of those classifications and would need to be reviewed by council again for that type of group living. I mean, that's the likely use for it for a building of this size with that many bedroom units. I suppose you could convert it to a single dwelling house, but a rather grand one, I would guess.
Okay, Mike or Colin, can you tell us about the Housing of Older Persons Act?
Sure, I could talk about that. To some extent, I could answer questions. But Caitlin is right. This is something that we are imposing on it for ourselves. And this is, I guess it's just our intent of what the building is going to be. It's was also the intent of what we proposed to the church when we bought the property from them was we made a proposal to them that we would build a housing for seniors, and they sold the property to us with that intent. So this is a goodwill intent of what we're trying to do. I could speak to, this is how we're designing the building, how we're designing the rooms, how we're designing the facilities within the building is to accommodate seniors. I guess all that said, I guess your question remains in 30 years from now, if a different applicant were to purchase this building, what happens then? Would they keep this? I cannot speak to that. When we were looking at this building, I could back up a little bit. My father lived in a building not too far from this, just about 4 blocks away, the Linwood Apartments. And that is a similar building in size. That's a little bit bigger. I think that's 44 units. We're at 36 units. But same age demographic. And so that's a similar building in the neighborhood that we're at least in my mind was what I was looking to when we were designing this one.
Great. Jordan, can I just follow up just for clarification? Thanks. I'm sorry I'm going on and on, but I just want to be able to articulate this to my constituents when they ask me. So my understanding is it's a conditional use application for group living scenario, and you are going to be under a program of 55 and older. So you're targeting seniors, and I appreciate the vision statement with the church and the goal of that. Down the road, though, if that is ever eliminated, the 55 plus, it could just be under this conditional use, people living there who are younger and as well as older than 55. But to have a core change, like having an assisted living facility or a healthcare facility, that would have to come back through council.
Yes. That all comes down to the group living definition that they're applying for does not have an age restriction in it. So it's like once they move out of what Title 20 defines as a group living, that's when you need a new conditional use process.
Okay, thank you, appreciate it.
So I have a follow-up question along those lines, I guess, and that's that generally fair housing, generally housing laws don't allow restricting by age, and an example of that is the Rome and Sawyer private student living facilities that are heavily marketed towards students, but certainly could have a non-student or someone who, a senior or anyone outside of the target demographic. But my understanding is that the Housing of Older Persons Act does permit the restriction, so this would actually be restricted to 55 plus. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah,
Okay.
the Housing for Older Persons Act, that was the point of it, was to allow senior living communities to discriminate based on age without running afoul of the federal laws.
Okay, so sorry, go ahead, Mike.
If I can speak, there are a couple nuances. There are 2 exemptions, age exemptions within the HOPA Act. There's a age 55 plus and there's an age 62 plus. The 62 plus is much more restrictive. Under that rule, if you file for that one, every resident in the building has to be age 62 plus. If it's a married couple, both individuals have to be age 62 plus. The age 55 plus is less restrictive. Only 80% of the building has to be age 55 or plus. If there's a married couple, only one has to be 55 plus. And if that person were to pass, if they were married to someone younger, and the older person were to pass away, the younger person would not have to move out. They would then fall into that 20% that's allowed to be younger residents. So the 55 rule, again, it's defined under the HOPA Act, and we would comply with that rule. But it's an 80-20 rule. You target all of our residents we would target would be 55 plus, but there are the exemptions, like if a married couple came in, and a spouse could be younger than 55.
Okay, thanks. That's helpful. And then does that designation come with a time horizon of, must remain in this use for X number of years, or is it like an annual tax credit, or is it does it just simply permit you to make that distinction, or Is there any kind of long-term structure with that?
There's no expiration date on it. There's annual recertification. If you want to keep this classification, you have to certify annually with it. But there's no expiration date to it.
Okay, thanks. For the record, Brian and Heather have both been with us for several minutes, so note that for the record. Heather has a question.
Yeah, thanks, Jordan. And Jordan and the rest of the committee, I apologize for my tardiness. Jordan, did we go over the River Road project already? Just so
We did, yeah.
Okay, all right. So we have lots of time.
Yep.
Okay. I have a couple of different questions. Mike Robinson in particular, sorry if you mentioned this before, but these are all going to be for rental versus home ownership, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. And then Caitlin and Mary, I think about the other group living project that came before us within the last 12 months. It was with Mr. Dernberger over adjacent to the Poverello and Montana Glass area. And, you know, I was thinking about how that was very new to this council, that concept. And I'm wondering if you can give us perhaps maybe a little more background of similar group living arrangements that have percolated through over the last maybe 5-10 years.
Beyond the Ponderosa
Burgers and Hogan, yep.
Ask me to explain that project or to explain a project that's not that?
I'm curious to know, like, are we starting to see more and more of these group living arrangements? Is this still just really unique to community?
I have limited institutional knowledge. However, I was on the Ponderosa project. I brought that through conditional use, and I would point to in the packet, Montana James made a comment on this project, and then in the growth policies, that emphasis on creating a range of opportunity for affordable housing. And so I think that these group living projects are speaking to that, different types of housing. So thinking about not only multi-dwelling duplexes and single dwelling, but trying to think out of the box a little bit.
Okay, thank you very much. And I guess circling back to you, Mr. Robinson, can you tell us how you got to the decision-making process, or how you went through that so that you determined that this was the best fit for our community?
Well, I can tell you how I came to the project. So I could speak to a little bit of that. About 20 years ago, we lived in Minnesota, a small town in Minnesota, and just 2 blocks away from us was a senior facility that looked very much like the design of one of our floors. It was a smaller building than this, and there were maybe, 15 or 20 residents. They lived in 2 wings in very modest rooms with little services, and then had a common room in the middle. We got to know a few of the residents there, one of the residents pretty well, and it was just, it was a great building. It provided social interaction for the residents in the middle. It was, their rents at that time were something like $300. My wife would go over there and play cards with one of the ladies. That building was bought up while we were there by a national senior housing person, and the rents went up almost 10 times, and they added very little service to it. So when we moved, we were helping one of the ladies move out of there, and we just could not find anything like that anywhere, within driving distance of her family. And so that put the, I guess that was my first interaction to like how unique that building was, and always thought that we could maybe try to recreate that if we ever got the chance. Just worked so well, we thought, for the seniors that were there, and there was just limited opportunity that we could find anywhere else to replace it.
Thanks, Mike. Just the last comment, if I might, Jordan.
Go ahead, Heather.
I really appreciate this kind of project. It's outside of the box of how we normally developed, and I think speaking to the comment about a range of housing options, I know there's a lot of people who, as they age and they lose their partner, they become more isolated, and so to have a group living environment like this helps those who are seeking company. And when you live in a single family house that may be too big for you and there's no place to downsize to be able to have this particular kind of home option for them, I think is going to be in great demand. And then just one last thing, Mike. I was at a hockey game last night, and one of my teammates was talking about this project, and I said, I can't talk about it. They're like, well, just question, is there really going to be a casino on the first floor? Just so you know, there's somebody out there that is spreading a rumor that you might want to get ahead of.
Yeah, and I will say that in the zone RT 2.7, casinos are not permitted at all.
Yeah.
So that is something to say to the public.
In the event that in the highly unlikely event this were ever to be rezoned to a zone that did allow casinos, I believe that the functional classification of 6th Street also would not allow casinos. I don't know if you could verify that, Caitlin, if you know, but I believe they have to be on major arterials, like Reserve or Russell or others.
Yep, you're right.
Okay, so we're triply protected because there's not a casino intended, the zone doesn't allow it, and the street doesn't allow it. So, thanks, Facebook. Julie, you have another question?
Oh, well, I will note that Montgomery Distillery has given a proposal to MCPS for a redo of the admin building that's across the street. So who knows? They might have a distillery across the street.
That is this parcel, this OP3, which would definitely have to go under a rezone and all other details.
Okay. Julie, do you have another question? Okay. Is there any public comment on this project? Okay, seeing none at this time, we will have opportunity for continued public comment and continued council deliberation until the final consideration on this item, which I believe is May 17th as well. Is that correct, Caitlin?
Yep.
Okay, great. So there's no action today. Thanks to committee members and the applicants for the discussion. Thanks, Caitlin, for the staff report. Anything else on this item? Seeing none, we have a quorum now, so we'll go back and approve the minutes. Are there any changes to the minutes? Seeing none, those will be approved. And we have no further business, so we'll be adjourned. Thanks, everyone.